Bismillahirrahmanirrahim dan salam sejahtera. So in this video, we are going to look at hypothesis testing for the difference between two population mean. So I divided this topic into two, where in this first part, we are going to look at independent t-test. An independent t-test is appropriate when different participants have performed in each of different conditions. So in other words, when the participants in one condition are different from the participant in the other condition. So you wish to determine whether the difference between mean for the two set of scores is significant. Alright, so basically dalam independent t-test ini kita nak compare means untuk dua group yang berbeza. Okay, participant dalam the first group adalah participant yang berbeza dengan group number 2. So, antara contoh-contoh comparison yang kita boleh buat, for example, is there a difference in test performance between class A and class B? So, you did a test and you want to compare the performance between class A and class B. Both class buat the same test, but orang dalam each class adalah two different participants. So other than that, you maybe can compare the difference between the salary between male exec and female exec, or you nak compare prices between houses in Melaka and Seremban. Okay, so independent t-test is where you nak compare means between two groups. So the generic assumption underlying all type of t-tests are scale of measurement must be at least interval scale. Okay, the scores should be randomly sampled from the population of interest, and normality, the score should be normally distributed in the population. Other additional assumption for independent t-tests are independence of groups. Participants should appear in only one group and this group are unrelated. Macam saya cakap tadi, compare between two classes, Kelas A dan Kelas B. Your participant tidak boleh ada dalam kedua-dua grup. Dia mesti hanya ada dalam salah satu grup sahaja. Participant in each group adalah berbeza. And the second one is homogeneity of variance. So the groups should come from population with equal variance. So, dalam apa-apa hypothesis testing, your first step adalah untuk state your statistical hypothesis. So, your hypothesis can be a one-tailed test or it can also be a two-tailed test. So, which one to use? It depends on what the question claims. Next, you find the critical values. So, critical value separates the critical region with non-critical region. And saya dah pernah tunjuk juga this diagram before this. So, sama sahaja. You can find your critical values from your statistical table, but which table you should use depends whether the population variance is known or unknown. So since this is hypothesis testing for two different mean, if the population variance is known, you refer table number 4, Z table, but if the population variance is unknown, you refer the T distribution table. So, nanti kita akan tengok example. Next step. Okay, so this is an additional step for independent t-test. Before this, when we do hypothesis testing for single mean, there is no test for equality of variance. But since we are doing independent t-tests, comparing means between two groups, then we have to check for the equality of variance by using Levene test. So before we proceed testing the difference between the two population mean, we must first determine whether the variance between the two population means between the two population are equal or not. So Levene test consists of 4 steps, and the first step is hypothesis. So in Levene test, kita nak test whether the variance for the two populations are equal or not. So you can write down either sigma squared 1 equal to sigma squared 2, or you can write down sigma squared 1 minus sigma squared 2 equal to 0. Means that there is no difference between the two population variance. Step number 2, determine your alpha value. So you may use 90%, 95% or 99% depending on the question. Step C, test the hypothesis using p-value method. So this is the only method that we are going to use to test the hypothesis. Simply look at the p-value for Levene test, and this value will be given in the SPSS output, which is this one. So in this example, the p-value is equivalent to 0.109 at 95%. And last but not least, you need to make decision whether to reject or not to reject your H null. So by using the p-value method, if the p-value is less than or equal to your alpha value, we reject H null and assume not equal variance. But if the p-value is greater than your alpha, thus we do not reject H null and assume equal variance. Next, baru kita continue dengan test hypothesis for the difference between two mean. Kita nak tengok, kita boleh gunakan 3 method. Method yang sama yang kita dah pakai dalam single mean. You can use traditional method, p-value method, or confidence interval method. So, to test the hypothesis using traditional method, for unequal variance and equal variance, the formula will be different, but you don't have to worry. The formula will be given in your final exam, so you just refer saja, but it's actually the same as before dalam estimation. So this will be the formula and the degree of freedom. So for equal variance, okay, you have to calculate your pool standard deviation. We can also find the value from your SPSS output. So here, T is equivalent to negative 1.345 or T is equivalent to negative 1.336. Kenapa kita ada 2 different values? It depends whether equal variance is assumed or equal variance is not assumed. So depending on your Levene test punya result, then you akan dapat value yang berbeza. So if your Levene test tadi kata assume equal variance, your T will be negative 1.345. But if your Levene test just now kata equal variance not assumed, then your T will be negative 1.339. So which value you should pick depending on the result obtained in your Levene test. You can also test the hypothesis using the p-value method. So the p-value given in the SPSS output is for a two-tailed test. So p-value dekat sini dia bagi awak two-tailed. Sama juga dia ada dua p-value, satu 0.181, another one is 0.184. Depending on whether to assume equal variance or not, based on the result in your Levene test. We can test the hypothesis using confidence interval method juga. So for unequal variance and equal variance. This is the formula will be given in your final exam. And this is the confidence interval from your SPSS output. Please make sure that you take note, alert dengan berapa persen confidence interval yang dipakai. Kalau soalan kata based on 95% confidence interval, yes, you can simply ambil sahaja value yang diberikan dalam your SPSS output. But if your output bagi 95% confidence interval, question asks you 99% confidence interval, you need to recalculate. You can't take this value. So please make sure that you read the question carefully and look at the output, which percentage yang dibagi. In step 5, we have to make decision whether to reject or not to reject our H0. So there are three methods that we used before this. The traditional method, if the test value is in the critical region, we reject our H0, and if it is not, we do not reject. If we are using p-value method, if the p-value is less than or equal to alpha, we reject our H0. But if the value is greater than alpha, we do not reject our H0. Please keep in mind that the p-value given in your output is a two-tailed test punya p-value. So if you are doing a one-tailed test, please divide the p-value given by 2. For confidence interval method, if zero value is not in the confidence interval, thus we reject H0. Kenapa kita tengok zero? Because we are comparing the difference between two mean. So kalau kita compare perbezaan di antara dua kumpulan, kalau kita tolakkan dapat kosong, sama. Kalau tolakkan tak ada zero in the confidence interval, thus we reject our H0. And last but not least, don't forget to make your conclusion. Answer what the question want, conclude whether there is or there is no enough evidence to support the claim made in the question. So let's look at the first example. So between Wendy's and McDonald's, which fast food drive-thru windows is faster? To answer this question, a random sample of service time for each restaurant was measured and analyzed based on SPSS output given. Is there any sufficient evidence to indicate that there is a difference in service time between the two restaurants? So here, what you can see is we have two different restaurants, different groups or different population, Wendy's and McDonald's. So kita nak tengok fast food drive-thru windows ni ada beza tak di antara kedua restoran ni. So dia tanya dekat dalam ni, is there a difference in service time between the two restaurant? So this is an example of two-tailed test. Kenapa two-tailed? Sebab dia hanya tanya ada beza ke tak ada beza. So sama ada mu1 sama dengan mu2 or mu1 tak sama dengan mu2. Itu sahaja. Tak kisah siapa lagi laju, siapa lagi perlahan, itu tak kisah. Okey. Seterusnya, sebab dia dah bagi awak SPSS output, awak boleh tengok dekat sini, confidence interval yang dia bagi adalah 95% confidence interval. So, soalan pun dia kata pakai alpha 0.05. Okay, nanti kita tengok soalan-soalan selepas ni, adakah dia still maintain 95%. Kalau dia still maintain 95%, then awak boleh ambil confidence interval ni jika ditanya. Yang keduanya, p-value. This one adalah p-value untuk Levene test. Ini pula adalah p-value untuk independent t-test for two-tail test. Okay, so itu yang kita dapat daripada SPSS output. So macam mana nak buat soalan ni? Okay, is there any sufficient evidence to indicate that there is a difference in service time? So bila dia tanya saja soalan macam ni, even though dia tak kata ini adalah soalan hypothesis testing, tapi kita akan follow all the steps in hypothesis testing. We are going to start with step number 1. State the statistical hypothesis. So, awak boleh buat mu1 sama dengan mu2, or you boleh buat mu1 tolak mu2 sama dengan 0. Kedua-dua hipotesis ini adalah hipotesis yang sama, cuma cara penulisan dia sedikit berbeza. And dalam soalan ini, dia suruh pakai critical value alpha 0.05. Step 3. So, before we can decide whether to reject or not to reject, which test and hypothesis testing cara kita nak pakai, kita kena test for the equality of variance dulu. So, there are 4 steps in testing the equality of variance. So, kita start with step A, state the hypothesis. Sama juga. You can write down sigma squared 1 sama dengan sigma squared 2, or you boleh tulis sigma squared 1 minus sigma squared 2 is equal to 0. Diterima. So, kalau yang itu, dia akan jadi tak sama dengan. Okay. So, next one, determine the value of alpha. So, if soalan tak ada bagi tahu pakai yang berapa, biasanya pun kita memang ambil alpha 0.05. Unless soalan kata pakai lain, baru you pakai alpha value yang berbeza. Test the hypothesis using p-value method. Okay, this is the only method yang kita pakai untuk Levene test in our syllabus. So here, our p-value is equivalent to 0.109. So from the output, our p-value is equivalent to 0.109. So you have to make decision whether to reject or not to reject. Since the p-value 0.109 ini lebih besar daripada alpha yang kita decide 0.05, we do not reject our H null. So kalau kita tak reject our H null, kita assume equal variance. So bila you dah decide saja ataupun bila kita dah conclude saja yang kita assume equal variance, please refer column yang cerita yang bagi value where dia assume equal variance. You neglect, discard another column where dia not assume equal variance. Okay, so bila kita dah siap Levene test, baru kita continue balik dengan kita punya hypothesis testing tadi. Ada beza ke? Tak ada beza dengan masa window Wendy's dengan McDonald's. So, kita test our hypothesis. There are 3 methods that can be used to test our hypothesis. You actually can use any method unless soalan specifically ask you to use a certain method. If not, you may use any method that you feel that you are confident with, that you feel that is the easiest method to use. If you ask me, I normally use a p-value method. Okay, but that is not fixed. Kalau soalan kata tak kisah, you boleh pakai mana-mana sahaja. So again, saya nak emphasize di sini, saya refer kolom untuk equal variance assume sahaja. Sebab apa? Tadi based on our Levene test, kita assume equal variance. So here, our traditional method t value adalah negative 1.345, our p value 0.181, and our 95% confidence interval adalah negative 17.057, and dia punya upper range, upper bound dia adalah 3.261. So here, okay, ini formula ada bagi tadi. So SE, okay, mana dapat SE ni, standard error ni dia. Standard error tadi. Untuk the difference between two mean. Okay. Mean difference dapat negatif 6.896. Mana dia dapat? Okay, dia tolakkanlah mean untuk Wendy's dengan McDonald's. So, mana nak tahu Wendy's tolak McDonald's ke McDonald's tolak Wendy's? Okay, you kena tengok your SPSS output. Okay, table yang lagi satu tadi. So, based on the value obtained, okay, we make decision whether to reject or not to reject H null. So, if you are using a traditional method, okay, since t is equivalent to negative 1.345, kita nak compare dengan your critical value, which is t 0.05 over 2, because this is a two-tail test with degree of freedom 114. So, refer your table, cari 0.025 with degree of freedom yang paling hampir dengan 114 but not exceed 114. So, kita dapat negative 2. If saya sketch dekat sini, so, kalaulah 2 dekat sini, this is our critical region. Negative 1 should be around here. So, not in the critical region, we do not reject our H null. If you are using the p-value method, since the p-value, okay, is 0.181 greater than your alpha value, sama juga, we do not reject our H null. And if you are using your confidence interval, then since zero value is in the confidence interval between negative 17 to 3.6, thus we do not reject our H null. Because we are 95% sure ataupun we are 95% confidence that the difference between the two mean is between negative 17 to 3. So, there are possibility the difference is 0. So, once you have decided whether to reject or not to reject, don't forget to make conclusion. There is no sufficient evidence to indicate that there is a difference in service times between the two restaurants. Please jawab balik apa yang soalan tanya ataupun soalan claim. Now, let's look at another example. The Faculty of Hotel Management and Tourism is interested in comparing the class assessment score of two different groups, okay, taught by two different lecturers. So, table 4 and 5 represent the SPSS output used by the faculty to make a conclusion. Based on the 95% confidence interval of the difference in the class mark, what can you conclude? So, dia suruh you refer 95% confidence interval. B. If the faculty wants to test whether the class assessment mark of the group taught by lecturer B is higher than group taught by lecturer A. So, claim dia, adakah B higher than A? State the appropriate null and alternative hypothesis. Higher than, lower than, dia akan jadi one-tail test, one-sided. Dekat sini claim dia B greater than A. So, dia akan jadi one-sided. Nanti kita akan tengok. And last sekali, dia suruh test the hypothesis in B using 1% level of significance. You tengok dalam soalan A 95%, soalan C 1%, kena alert. So how to answer this kind of question? So let's look at the SPSS output given for this question. So dia bagi you class assessment marks, okay, by two lecturers. lecturer A and B. So given here mean for lecturer A and mean untuk lecturer B. And if you look at table number 5, dia bagi mean difference sama dengan negative 2.1989. So mana dia dapat this value? So based on this output, kita tahu yang output ini dia buat X bar A tolak X bar B sama dengan negative 2.1989. So bila you buat hipotesis nanti, you buat mu A tolak mu B. Okay, boleh ke kalau dia nak buat mu B tolak, boleh ke output bagi awak B tolak A? Boleh. So macam mana nak tahu? Tengok dekat mean difference je lah. Okay, daripada situ kita boleh tahu dia buat A tolak B atau B tolak A. Okay, so dekat sini juga dia bagi you 95% CI ya. Okay. So untuk soalan A, based on the 95% confidence interval of the difference in the class mark, what can you conclude? So awak tak boleh tiba-tiba conclude. Kenapa? Awak ada dua confidence interval. Yang mana satu yang you nak ambil? So awak kena buat Levene test dulu. Okay, to see whether you should assume equal variance or assume not equal variance. So bila you nak buat saja Levene test, start balik step A, B, C and D. Okay, step A, state the hypothesis untuk Levene test, which is this one. Lepas you determine your alpha value. Biasa by default kita pakai 0.05 lah, unless stated differently. Okay, test the hypothesis using p-value. So p-value dapat 0.00 untuk Levene test. Okay, so kita tengok step. So what is your decision? Since the p-value sama dengan 0.000 is less than alpha 0.05, we reject our H null. So kalau reject H null, kita assume not equal. Kalau assume not equal, please refer row yang bagi awak a value untuk not equal. Okay, so tadi dia tanya pasal 95% CI, kita ambil 95% CI, negative 2.961, negative 1.437. Okay, so apa yang you boleh conclude? Is there a difference between class taught by lecturer A and lecturer B? So, since 0 is not in the confidence interval, we can conclude that there is a significant difference in the class assessment score of the two different groups of students taught by two different lecturers. Okay, kenapa kita tengok 0? Because kita nak tengok perbezaan di antara dua kumpulan. Kalau you tolak markah kumpulan A dengan kumpulan B, dapat 0, bermaksud dia sama, tidak berbeza. Tapi kalau you tolak dan the confidence interval state that the difference is between negative 2 dengan negative 1, maksudnya tolak macam mana pun mesti ada beza di antara range negative 1 sampai negative 2.9. So that's why kita kata there is a significant difference between the two groups. B. If the faculty wants to test whether the class assessment marks of the group taught by lecturer B is higher than the group taught by lecturer A. So ini soalan dia. Dia tanya, adakah B greater than A? Dia suruh tuliskan hipotesis. Now, walaupun dia tanya B greater than A, daripada SPSS output tadi, kita tahu dia buat mu A tolak mu B. So, kalau nak test B greater than A, maksudnya apabila A tolak B, you akan dapat nilai yang kurang daripada 0. Kalau B is higher. So, ini yang dia claim, yang dia tanya. Adakah group B higher than group A? So, kalau B higher than A, mu A tolak mu B should be less than 0. Ini claim, soalan claim. Okay, atau you boleh juga tuliskan hipotesis awak macam ni. Dua-dua boleh, and ini adalah example untuk one tail test, one-sided. Okay, so dia suruh test the hypothesis in B using 1% level of significance. So, setiap kali suruh test hypothesis, kena ikut step. Step 1, state the hypothesis, dah buat. Step 2, find your critical value. Dia suruh pakai alpha 0.01. Step 3, test the equality of variance. Kena test guna Levene test sebab kita nak compare between two means. Cuma kita dah buat dalam soalan A tadi. So, daripada soalan A, based on the previous question, kita assume the variance are not equal. Now, we can test our hypothesis. So, from the SPSS output, kita boleh tengok our traditional, kalau menggunakan traditional method, T kita negatif 5.669. Kalau guna p-value, p-value-nya adalah 0. Kenapa saya bahagi dengan 2? Because this is a one-tail test. Okay, please keep in mind, one-tail p-value untuk independent test kena bahagi 2. Now, kenapa saya tak ambil value confidence interval? Sebab dia suruh test 1%. Tapi dalam ni dia bagi 95%. Dia tak state which method dia suruh pakai. So, saya ada lagi 2 method. Saya neglect confidence interval punya method. So, based on the p-value. Okay, I think this is the easiest way to make decision lah. Okay, so, based on the p-value, you dapat 0 tadi, is less than 0.01, so we reject our H null. You dah decide to reject, what is your conclusion? So, there is sufficient evidence to indicate that the class assessment marks of the group taught by lecturer B is higher than the group taught by lecturer A. You tengok dekat sini, conclusion saya mestilah menerangkan balik apa yang soalan claim, apa yang soalan minta, apa yang soalan suruh buktikan. So, sebenarnya, kalau kita tengok, kita compare dengan single mean, stepnya sama, cuma dalam comparing two means untuk independent t-test, kita add Levene test untuk tengok, untuk check the equality of variance. So, that's all untuk part 2.1 independent t-test. Thank you everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.